Good afternoon. My name is Campbell Lovett, interim pastor here at Congregational Church of Laconia, and on behalf of this church that he loved, I want to welcome you to this service of praise and thanksgiving to God in honor of a noble and good man, Peter V. Millham. In this service together, we mark the fact of his death, but we offer no further tribute to that somber event which must befall each one of us. Rather, in this time together, we celebrate not with tears, but really with a deep sense of appreciation for a man well loved and a life well lived. This service has been designed to recall and honor Peter's life and legacy in the hymns, in the readings, in the reflections that will be shared. We recall his unique characteristics as a husband, father, lawyer, gardener, town moderator, colleague, sailor, and friend. And so more of these stories can be told. Everyone is cordially invited to a time of reception and reunion at the Bean Conference Center immediately following this service. The conference center is north on Main Street and a left on Blueberry Lane, number 35. Our opening hymn is in your black hymnals in front of you, number 28, For the Beauty of the Earth, verses 1 through 3. Congregation may be seated.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for braving both, I want to say fire and rain, but it's been quite an afternoon for weather. Thank you for coming. In case you can't tell, I'm Peter's son, Fred. Yeah, he left me his face and his will. Peter was a big man. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, Peter was a big man in every way. He was tall and strong, and for most of his life, he was very fit. He could really light up a room, though. Whether it was a courtroom or a dining room, a gymnasium or a ski lodge. He was smart, handsome, charismatic, and charming. He was a man of integrity. He also loved M&Ms. Like his parents and his grandparents before him, Peter attended St. Lawrence University, where he was truly a big man on campus. He had a reputation as both fearless and ferocious. The school announcer, Brian McFarland, who went on to be the Brian McFarland of Hockey Night in Canada, called him Kill'em Millham. He must not have been that ferocious, though, because during his junior year, he caught the eye of a freshman, Elida Isham, a North Country girl. And there in bleak and windswept Canton, the two began their 70-year romance. Elida has always had Peter right. He was a lover, not a fighter. After college, Peter entered the service. In those days, military duty wasn't optional. He spent 2 years in the Army as a military policeman, mostly at Fort Dix, which is in New Jersey, serving in the 716th Military Police Battalion. He didn't like the Army, I think in part because it was difficult for him to take orders, particularly orders to do dumb things. Among other duties, his platoon of MPs was responsible for convoying the battalion from point A to point B. They would load the guys into 2.5-ton trucks and move them around. These maneuvers were always conducted on weekends and always in the rough and wild areas of Fort Dix. It involved a lot of dust and mud, and it killed the weekend, making the MP platoon, as well as the rest of the battalion, very unhappy. As Peter told the story, he, at the time, a 21-year-old newly minted first lieutenant, went to the battalion commander, who I imagine must have been a brigadier general. He asked the general why they were spending every weekend driving around the boonies, making a couple thousand men bivouac, and then pack up the gear, drive around the base some more, to return to the barracks on Sunday night. The general told him he was looking to win the Division Motor Pool Award by getting as many breakdown-free miles on the battalion's vehicles as possible. This made no sense to Lieutenant Millham. Perhaps foreshadowing his career as an attorney, he started asking the general some clarifying questions. Was it necessary for the miles to be logged on the base? No. Was it necessary for the men to convoy only on weekends? No. Was it necessary for the entire battalion to move, or just the trucks? Just the trucks. It turns out it was all about the miles on the trucks, not the miles on the men. Lieutenant Millham proposed an alternative. Why not convoy empty trucks up and down the New Jersey Turnpike during the work week? The mileage would be easier on the trucks, less likely to result in mechanical failure. The men would like the general a lot more. Apparently, the general wanted to be popular almost as much as he wanted the Motor Pool Award. Soon, my father and his platoon of MPs and a couple dozen truck drivers were spending their Cold War driving empty trucks up and down the New Jersey Turnpike. The battalion got the award. Peter received the Meritorious Service Medal, which I have here. And it has a bronze star on it, meaning he got it twice. I think this medal, for me, is a symbol of my father's dedication to make the world a better place by keeping the Army moving nowhere. I'm certain you'll agree that this story is classic Peter Millham. He made the problem with the general into a positive-sum game. Everybody won. Luckily for us, Peter didn't find Army life appealing. After he put in his 2 years, he got out, went to law school, and married Elida. The couple began their life together in New York City. But when it came to putting down roots, Peter decided not to follow a path of privilege by joining his father's Wall Street firm. He knew he was leaving a lot of money on the table, but he had also seen that his father's lifestyle had left little time for family or fun. Peter wanted a different path. Harold Westcott Jr. was Peter's St. Lawrence roommate. As a law student, Peter had clerked for his father, Harold Sr., who I always knew as Judge Westcott, who was a Superior Court judge. I heard a story about Peter and Elida racing around the Lakes region in Harold Jr.'s Corvette as some sort of recruiting activity. It worked. Peter and Elida moved north, and they rented an apartment above a fish market, where the Happy Cow is now. Interesting, isn't it, that Peter's life here in New Hampshire begins and ends on Union Avenue. For those of you from out of town, the Happy Cow is an ice cream joint, Peter's favorite, which happens to be just down the street from the Taylor community. On a day like today, I'd recommend it. As a little boy, I enjoyed watching my dad in court because he was so entertaining. He took me to see a case he tried in Plymouth about a dead deer. He represented the alleged killer. The deer and his family were represented by the district attorney. From my perspective, it looked like Dad crushed the prosecution. Nevertheless, Dad, the prosecutor, and I enjoyed a very pleasant lunch in the diner across the street from the courthouse. I don't remember who won, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the deer. That story aside, Peter generally preferred to find solutions to problems where everyone won. He was always looking for the positive sum game. Raising a family in the Lakes region did allow Peter to be the father he wanted to be. He loved the three of us, and he loved competitive sports. Whether it was in the stands, beside the track, or keeping gates, he was always there cheering us on. Sometimes he might have shared a little too much of his spirit, though. I think there are some referees with PTSD from some of the advice he might have been giving them during basketball games. Dad loved serving his community. He was a Gunstock area commissioner back before that was such a politically fraught position. It was during those years that the area expanded, adding new chairlifts and trails. I think Dad really liked that role because it allowed him to help build something that brought jobs to the Lakes region, but also created a place for people to spend time together outside. It was another win-win. The job of commissioner didn't pay anything, but it came with season passes. Peter was a master of the Stein technique, skis together, gracefully swooping down the hill. I like to think of his fluid technique as a metaphor for his grace in public life. He could always find the skiable snow amid the bumps, ice, and bare spots. And of course, speaking of skiing, I ran into Bob Bolduc at the Happy Cow last week, and he reminded me that Dad had worked on the transfer of Pichets to Bob's ownership way back. As Bob tells it, Peter figured out a way for Bob, who didn't have a lot of capital at the time, to take over the business in a way that Francis was able to get the money that he needed to retire. Again, everybody won. And this time, everybody gets 20% off. It also took a big-hearted yet fair man to moderate the Guilford town meeting. One could learn a lot from watching my father run the town meeting. If you think that's an easy job, you never met Arthur Tilton. Arthur would spring to his feet, "Mr. Moderator! Mr. Moderator!" And my father would hold the lectern and lean forward and say, "Arthur, you have to let us get along with the meeting. You've said what you came here to say." Year after year, for 40 years, he managed to end every town meeting with everyone feeling heard. Another one of his favorite communities was the Winnipesaukee Yacht Club. where he was a personality in addition to being the Commodore. Around the post-race beer keg, at work parties, at cookouts on Bear Island, and most especially at his favorite time, Haul Out, Peter liked to make things fun. He enjoyed sharing his joy in living, making sure that everyone was included. For the past few years, he hosted family reunions on Meredith Neck for the Millham diaspora. This year's reunion was the last week in June, and Peter was too ill to travel to see his siblings. Instead, his sisters and brother came to spend time with him at Taylor, and the group, including Peter, treated the Taylor folks to a rousing chorus of the inexplicably favorite song of the Millham clan, "My Father Murdered a Kangaroo." If you knew Peter's father was not capable of murdering a kangaroo. I think with the approval of this final agenda item, the meeting could finally adjourn. Peter died soon after, with Elida and Anne and Jim at his side. Now all of us must say goodbye to Peter Van Etten Millham, Army logistics expert, law partner, Commodore, county commissioner, town moderator, board member, friend, brother, son, grandfather, father, and husband. Peter used to tell us he was home by announcing, "It's me, Peter V, from across the sea." We won't hear that line again. His passing will leave a huge hole in many hearts, an empty spot at many meetings, and a vacant chair at the head of the table.
Our next hymn recalls Peter's life as a gardener, 433. In the bowl there is a flower, 1 and 3.
First of all, I'm not going to run up the steps like Fred did. My running up the steps days are probably behind me. I have some prepared remarks, but a lawyer told me just Saturday that, when you're preparing remarks for an event such as this, you have the prepared remarks that you sit down and you write out. And then there are the remarks that you actually give at the ceremony. And then thirdly, there are the remarks that you should have given. So I'll try my best to bring at least my perspective of this wonderful man that I had the privilege of knowing for literally 60 years. I first met Peter in 1963, and shortly thereafter, events occurred that brought us together more permanently. As I look through my own personal life, as I'm sure all of you do, there are certain dates or days that stand out. There would be, you know, the day of your wedding or the birth of your children. One of the special days for me occurred shortly after I had met Peter in 1963. I was looking for a job, and Peter Millham and Harold Westcott were actually looking for a young associate at that time. So they called and asked me if I'd be interested in coming in to see them, and I did that, and I interviewed, and they said, well, I think we'll hire you. We'll try you out and see how you do. So the day was established for me to arrive for my first day at the office, and I thought I would impress them. So I arrived at 8:30 that morning. Peter and Judge Westcott were waiting for me when I arrived, and they said, oh, by the way, the office opens at 8. So, well, I was never late from that point on, and I think a number of the staff that are here from the Westcott firm would fully understand why I was always the first person in the office in the morning for 50-odd years after that. So I do have some prepared remarks. I'd like to stay on message if that's possible. Being a lawyer and particularly talking about a person such as Peter Millham is personally very, very difficult, but I will soldier on and do what I can. Peter has been my friend and law partner for more than 50 years, actually I believe 55 years. He's been my mentor and the fine-tuner of my moral compass, and that's an important aspect, and I think you would hear that from any one of the lawyers who are present this afternoon who had the privilege of working with Peter. I also describe Peter as my wingman. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, a wingman harkens back to World War I, and the lead pilot would always have what they called a wingman. This would be another fighter pilot who would be slightly behind the leader, and the purpose of the wingman was basically to watch the back of the leader and make sure that nothing untoward happened. So that was my job for 50-odd years, to be Peter's wingman. I really enjoyed that because that meant that Peter was out front, you know, being the leader, and I was in back, you know, just working with him and for him. And I would also mention that while Peter and I never did have any dog fights, we certainly had a number of legal skirmishes over the years, and I will not go into them because that would take the rest of the afternoon. As the law firm grew, it was obvious to all who were involved in the law firm that Peter was always the leader. He was the person that could be called upon for counsel. If you had a problem, you would normally go and talk it over with Peter. He just simply had that personality and that aura about him that we all clearly recognized that he was the go-to person as far as our law firm is concerned. He did instill in the firm a culture of good ethical lawyering that, in my opinion, pervades to this day. However, Peter did have a failing, and that was he could never bring himself to terminate an employee. It was a rare event in the office, but that was never Peter performing that task. That's one of the tasks for the wingman. And it was always the case. Others have said that Peter was a brilliant lawyer with great analytical skills. And anyone who practiced either for or against Peter would, I think, would agree with that assessment. He had moral courage and a highly developed sense of what was right and what was wrong. And I agree, and I listened with great pleasure to Fred's narrative of Peter as from his perspective and also from mine, because I just thought the world of him. As previously stated, he had a moral compass for me and for many others, and he would always, we would always seek Peter's opinion if we were troubled by an ethical issue. I have some brief comments from some of his law partners, and I'd like to share them very brief. Peter was a mentor to many of us. He helped us to become better lawyers and better members of our communities. He guided us with his high ethical standards. He reminded us that we should always have a sense of humor. He made us better people, and that came from one of his former partners, Patrick Wood. Another observation, Peter Millham was everything that a lawyer should be, but more importantly, he had unquestioned integrity. In life, he was a fellow traveler, and he made the trip more interesting for all who traveled with him. And that's attributable to Judge Ned Gordon, again, one of our former partners. Another one, beyond being a good lawyer, Peter was a lawyer for good, meaning that he took to heart the ethical standards that attorneys should follow, not only in their careers, but on their personal paths. And that's attributable to Attorney Paul Fitzgerald, one of the continuing partners in the Westcott firm. Even the most experienced of us should listen and take heed the lessons that Peter left for us by the way he lived his life. And that's from the Honorable Sue Carbon, a sitting Superior Court judge. He made a real difference in the lives of so many people, and I think that he would simply say to each of us, I did my best, now it's your turn. That's attributable to Sharon Chapman on behalf of all of the Westcott firm staff, both past and present, and a number of them are in the service today. But Peter was not a one-dimensional lawyer. He was not Moses declaiming from the mountaintop and providing dictates as others might have done under the circumstances. However, he would declare the law according to Millham, particularly if he disagreed with a judge's decision. In other words, if a decision came down that Peter disagreed with, he would then declare to us what the law should be, and that would be the law according to Millham. Sometimes he prevailed, sometimes he didn't. And as Fred Millham indicated, Peter was more or less understated, at least he was in the law firm, except that he did have a reputation for shall we say, active participation in the athletics of its children. And that's a local legend in those of you from Guilford. Peter and Elida were a bonded couple. They each had their individual careers, and they each have their records of exemplary public service. You've heard from Fred, you'll hear from others about this wonderful couple. However, there are many stories about the informal nature of Peter. Peter, as I indicated earlier, was not one-dimensional, and he certainly had a sense of humor, and that translated into the socials that we would have at the law office, celebrating birthdays or things of that nature. And Peter liked to liven things up. One time he came in, and he probably got this from his St. Lawrence days. He came in with a cape and a big H on his shirt, and he said, "I'm hostile man." And sure enough, he was. And then on one occasion, he came in dressed as a belly dancer. And another occasion, he came in dressed in a tutu. And you may think, well, Dyer's exaggerating, but we have the photographic proof of all of this. And so he did have the highly developed sense of humor that we just love. Peter is quoted to have said that the definition of a friend is a person who owns a truck. However, Peter did not come up with that quip. Actually, it came from his close friend, Leo Sanderson. But Peter loved that little story, so I thought I would share it with you. After 50 years of, actually close to 60 years, of being with Peter on a daily basis, practically 8 hours a day, obviously, I've been emotionally involved as far as his passing, but I celebrate each and every year that I've had the privilege of working with this wonderful man. And in the program that you have, there's a reference to a Supreme Court Society interview. The New Hampshire Supreme Court, through its Supreme Court Society, decided some years ago that they were going to prepare living interviews of distinguished lawyers and judges, and they have done so. And these interviews are on the internet and are available for you to watch at any time at your convenience. And it was my privilege in 2014 to interview Peter, which is a normal process. And I would strongly recommend that if you have the opportunity, that you look at this interview. And as I say, the prompts are in the program. And I think you will agree with me that if you watch the living testament of this wonderful man, you will readily see what many, many of us have observed over the years, and that's the wonderful personality, intelligence, and moral character of Peter Millham. Paraphrasing Ralph Waldo Emerson, the purpose of life is to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. I believe that Peter exemplified all of these purposes in life. He was an extraordinary man and a classic example of a life well lived. I think Peter would probably have been embarrassed by all of the accolades that he's received recently. However, I think he would be privately pleased. Thank you.
Nature's first green is gold,
her hardest hue to hold,
her early leaf's a flower,
but only so an hour.
then leaf subsides to leaf,
So Eden sank to grief,
so dawn goes down to day.
nothing gold can stay.
Our next hymn for congregational singing is number 31, All Things Bright and Beautiful.
Sarah.
Anne, we want to we want to share with you some memories and reflections about having Peter Millham as a father. We had so many stories that we had to settle on some general categories.
Because I just missed my first line saying, I spent 61 years collecting material. Oh. You'll never know that I missed my first line then. I said, we'll start over. I'm Sarah.
I'm Anne. We want to share with you some memories and reflections about having Peter Millham as a father.
And we'll warn you that I have spent 61 years collecting material, so get comfortable.
We had so many stories that we had to settle on some general categories. The first one is laughter. When I picture my father, the first image I get of him is laughing at the dinner table. In my parents' house, our house, the picnic table at the island, or somewhere else.
So much laughter, so much sitting around the dinner table laughing. I couldn't even tell you what we ever even laughed about. We just laughed a lot. Later in life, Peter developed a condition that made it, he just started to choke when he laughed too much. And so, although they say laughter is the best medicine, really the challenge at the end was to not get too much of a good thing. He had a lot of different kinds of laughs, but the one I really found charming was when he had told a joke and he thought it was a really good joke, and he didn't want to get caught laughing at his own joke. He had this particular kind of thing that he did like that.
Another really laughy memory is of a lunch we had in a small village in the Alsace region of France. And we were laughing so hard we couldn't eat or drink the food that was in front of us. And we sort of realized that we were the amusement of all the other guests at this restaurant, and we sheepishly paid the bill and had to leave.
The next category we found was singing. And you didn't have to know Peter very well to know that he didn't really talk a lot, but he did enjoy singing. And that's why we have so many songs in this service. He had an oddly encyclopedic knowledge of musical theater lyrics, which poured out of him at any old time, and a particular talent he had for making up little ditties about whatever the situation at hand was. To this day, I can't go to the mailbox and open the mailbox without that classic composed somewhere in 1965 called "It Came in the Mail by Golly" popping into my head. So if the toes were tapping and the nonsense verse was flowing, you knew he was happy.
If you were at a sporting event, say, and the other team had showed up with the black marks under their eyes, he might say something like, "Mascoma, mascoma, sis, boom, ba, poke 'em in the eyebrows, rah, rah, rah." Or if Elida needed a break and you were playing on the floor as a toddler and getting tossed in the air so your yellow hair looked like ropes, you might get "Annie Banani with meatball eyes, put her in the oven and you get French fries."
When my husband Tom shared Peter's obituary with his co-workers, he titled the top of his email with, "We've lost this mountain of a man." And I think that's just about right. He was a solid human in all respects, physically, spiritually, in any other way you want to describe, dependably good. So I'm just going to fall back on that overused saying, "He was my rock," an ever-present example of humility, unquestionable integrity, profound loyalty, and boundless generosity. However, that's not to say that he couldn't challenge people. That same Tom, who shared the obituary, who grew up boating on Lake Champlain and came to Lake Winnipesaukee with a lifetime of expertise at the helm, was never able to shake the intimidation of docking the boat while anywhere within Peter's line of sight.
He was a strong, strapping guy, but the thing was, he was also really gentle, and he was a calm in a storm and a great hugger. He would have one of us crew for him on summer sailing races. One of my memories from that is how calm he was in instructing me on what we would do before we did it, why we weren't going to do what the other boats were doing, to observe the subtle ripples of the wind was making to the lee of the island, and then he would make the maneuver, and the sails would fill, and he would look at me with that twinkle in his eye, and I knew we had hit it right on. No words necessary. When it worked and we started passing boats, he would flash that smile, and I knew we were all well.
One time in my college skiing career, Peter had in his car, serendipitously, a bottle of champagne. And someone, he knew it was not me, someone had a particularly good result, and he ran out to the car, got the bottle of champagne, and the reception that he received was so good that he saw an opportunity. And every weekend thereafter, he was known as Champagne Man. He was a reliable source of good cheer for 99% of the people, even those who, for the person who received the champagne, but also for everyone else who did not win the race. He made everyone happy.
Champagne Man continued into my track career at Bates, slightly altered. It wasn't quite as often, but he was still there. A similar wish to please led to there being a freezer fully stocked with fudgesicles and beer whenever we would visit, especially on the island. Projects. If he loved you or wanted to get to know you better, he found ways to invite you to spend time with him. For our husbands, that often meant a project that was pre-planned, completable, and completed during the stay. In our family, the Stealth Deck project was on Mark Island was a classic Peter project. He showed up, we showed up, and the wood was purchased, the saws, hammers, and nails were at the ready, and Jim was engrossed with the project with Peter. They did a wonderful job, and the Stealth Deck, so called because it could not be seen from the water, was a great feature of many years of enjoyment on the island together.
It was hard to choose what projects to talk about, because there were a lot of projects to do with Peter, but one of my favorites was our annual entry into the Old Home Day Parade. My family would come over from Vermont for a week, the week before Old Home Day, and we would during which time, as a multi-generational team, we conceived, created, and put on the street some pretty elaborate entries, including the giant bald eagle, a 12-foot tall papier-mâché masterpiece that Peter wore and was accompanied by his small eaglets, his grandchildren. So maybe you remember that one, I don't know. There were jobs for all ages and interests, and when we needed to escape the work of putting the entries together, we always ran out to Mark Island, enjoyed the water, relaxed, overcooked the hot dogs, and feasted on potato salad.
Project Guy could also manifest as travel man. Peter and Elida loved to travel. They traveled a lot with their friends and siblings, but he also planned many trips where the objective was to spend time with his family.
Mexico, Portugal, the Rhine, a guided tour of the Lakes Region's dams, including a beaver dam off Route 11,
the Mississippi River,
giving the grandchildren a family historical tour of northern New York,
the coast of Maine,
Bermuda. We all know that if your phone rang and the caller ID said Peter, there was some business to attend to, because the phone was not to be used for anything other than business. He was an economical man in all ways, and that certainly held true in his use of words. And yet, somehow, maybe because he didn't cloud the air with excess verbiage, he managed to communicate very well.
In person, he could convey his feelings about you just by the way he held you, or about what you were doing with the little twinkle of the eye and a good girl. He was dignified and fair, even as a parent. For me, the last week spent with her were special because he made it so clear in his strong silent way, and sometimes not so strong silent way, that he loved us all very, very much.
I spent quite a lot of time with Peter over these last months, and there was a period where we had what I came to call the 4:30 chat, when he woke up from an afternoon nap and I sat by the bedside, and uncharacteristic for both of us, we chatted. And we covered a lot of territory. We even talked about serious things like life and death. There were 3 things I'd like to share with you about these discussions. Never did he say that he was ready to die. There was one time when he acknowledged that things might not be going so well, but he consistently held out for what he called a future. Secondly, we talked a lot about enjoying life. He wanted to make sure that I understood. He was preaching to the choir here, but that it's important to enjoy life and that he enjoyed his life. And third, he was happy with the way his life turned out. We talked a lot about that, and he was happy. He knew what he was doing when he struck out from New York City to begin his career here in the Lakes region, a place that held so much promise for him with its lakes and mountains, and delivered beyond his wildest dreams with the people he found and the communities he joined. These people are you. And so in case you haven't been paying attention, Ann and I want to remind you that Peter was the moderator of the town of Guilford for 40 years, and now we're going to hold Peter's ultimate town meeting.
Order. Sarah would like to put a motion on the table.
I move that you bring into focus in your mind whatever it is about Peter that brought you here on this Sunday afternoon to celebrate his life. Okay, you got it? All right. Now I move that you take whatever it is that you're holding in your mind right now and bring it back out into the community, the communities you shared with Peter.
All in favor?
Raise your
Aye.
program and say aye. Okay, I don't have a gavel, but we're going to ring it in with this bell that says, "To Peter Millham, in appreciation for his so many years of service with the Shaker Regional School District."
The meeting is adjourned.
As we prepare to sing our concluding hymn this afternoon, we commend Peter to God's nearer presence, where he joins all the saints who have already gathered We hadn't talked about what we might do with that last camp.
No, we didn't. That's okay. It worked out all right.
I was thinking